Good morning, I'm Lieutenant Kevin Okihiro, Executive Officer. Welcome to Fleet Diving Unit Pacific.
Hey everybody, welcome to Go Bold. My name is Jody Atariwala and I'm your host. And today I'm joined by Lieutenant Kevin Okihiro, who is the Executive Officer of the Fleet Dive Unit Pacific, which is adjacent to Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey Jody, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it.
It's great to be here with you. So we are in your office right now, and I start every conversation by asking my guests, what made you join the military and what made you pick the branch that you did?
Well, Jody, it's a good story. I wanted to follow in the footsteps of my grandfather on my mother's side, who was an Air Force navigator during the Second World War. So I wanted to go to the military college, RMC, as a pilot. So when I applied, I was also encouraged to put down additional trades. So I went down the list of trades and I saw MARS, and I said, oh, MARS being Maritime Surface and Subsurface Officer.
Okay.
And I thought, yeah, that sounds pretty cool, MARS.
Yeah.
So I put that down as my fourth choice, and then I got the call a couple months later, and they said, congratulations, you got into the Royal Military College as a MARS officer. And I said, oh, that's great. I don't know what that is. But as it turns out, this was actually the best decision I ever made, because being a Maritime Surface and Subsurface Officer,
Yep.
It's the only trade that allows you to be a clearance diving officer, which is what I am today. And this is absolutely the best job in the CAF.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit, Kevin, about your upbringing, your family history. Okihiro, if I have that correct, it's Japanese heritage.
Yes, Joey, that's right. So my father is Japanese. Both of his parents are Japanese, although I believe they're third generation. So it was my great-grandparents that came to Canada initially from Japan.
Awesome.
On my mother's side, they're Irish, Australian, and British. So real mix there.
Nice.
I grew up in Oakville, Ontario, which is quite close to Toronto. Mm-hmm. And I had a standard upbringing, nothing too interesting.
And then once you got into the Royal Military College, tell me a little bit about what that was like, because here you are going into a very structured environment. And how did you take to that?
I really enjoyed the structure that the Royal Military College provided. I enjoyed all the challenges that the military college was able to give its candidates. You have the first year orientation period, which is a challenge. There's the first year obstacle course. There's many opportunities as you proceed up through your years in the military university to have leadership positions and to exercise and practice, the type of leader you would like to be. Mm-hmm. So I found it to be a tremendously beneficial experience. But I think the best thing about the military college is the network that you gain, because you work shoulder to shoulder for 4 years with people in the Army, the Air Force. So when you become a commissioned officer some years later and you see on an email chain a familiar name, it's just that much easier to reach out and say, hey, remember 3 Squadron? Yeah, remember the obstacle course? Great. Can you help me do this, please? And people are just a little bit more amenable to helping you if there's that basis of familiarity. So that's what I think the best aspect of the military college is.
Awesome. And how do you feel? And there's mixed views on how people feel a military college might prepare you to be a leader. Your current position, you are executive officer of the Fleet Dive Unit Pacific. But some people say it prepares people to be leaders, and others say, well, you really gain leadership skills once you're actually doing a job. Maybe the military college might give you a foundation, but you really don't become a leader until you're out there. But I'd love to get your thoughts of how leadership develops, or how you think it develops in the military.
I believe leadership develops when members are placed in positions where they're required and responsible to make decisions and to achieve a certain effect. So at the military college, what I can say is that you do have occasions and you do have positions where you're required to make decisions. Now they're smaller time decisions than you would make, even in the civilian world.
Right.
Very small things such as how to manage your squadron's participation in this parade or this inspection. And it's down to you to exercise, your plan to achieve that goal. And you see all kinds of examples of what some would say are good ways to do it, and other ways are less ideal.
Right.
But everything you see and learn enables you to build a foundation of experience to develop your own leadership style. So any exposure you can get as early as you can get, I believe, helps develop your particular leadership style later on.
Awesome. So once you graduated from the military college and you get formally into the you were formally in the Navy at that time. That's the specialty in which you joined. But once you graduate and you actually get to the fleet, tell me what that was like for you, and from that point forward, how did you stream towards the dive unit side of things in the Navy?
So immediately upon graduation from the military college, myself and a number of other graduates found ourselves with a gap between our Phase 3 training and once we arrived in Victoria. So we signed up to do the ship's dive course, which is 6 weeks of very physically demanding challenge, which teaches you to be an initial diver aboard a ship. So your jobs are ship's husbandry, that is, hull surveys, a little bit of underwater force protection, searching the hull for anything that shouldn't be there.
Right.
And then a little bit of hull maintenance as well.
Okay.
But it's 6 weeks, it's very demanding, and upon completion of that phase, you're rewarded your ship's dive pin, and that was the first thing in the military I felt I'd really truly earned.
Right on.
I was in the big military now. I wasn't a cadet anymore. This was the first recognized military achievement.
Yeah.
That myself and my comrades had earned. So that was a pretty special time for us, and I think that kind of set the idea in my head that maybe this is something I wanted to come back to.
Nice. And had you ever dived before?
I'd never dove before, no.
No kidding. So it's not like you have to have that expertise or that even that knowledge set before. The Navy will teach you.
Absolutely. So the ship's dive course is 6 weeks long, but I mean, you can take a PADI course in a weekend or 2 weekends to achieve what's the open water qualification. So you're awarded an open water qualification on completion of this ship's dive course as well.
Nice.
But the reason why it's 6 weeks is because the diving here wants to ensure that the divers are able to stand up to physical and mental stress.
Right.
Because part of the job is to sweep hulls for anything that shouldn't be there. So that could be underwater explosive threats. So there is a small element of concern there, and the course is designed to ensure that the candidates are mentally prepared to deal with that.
Right.
Roger. Let me know when everyone's here. Yes, stand by. What's the awkward? What we're about to see is we're going to see one of our ship's team diving courses as they do their training. One of them just run past now. For those who ask why they're running everywhere, it's because ship's divers breathe only air. Air is a limited quantity in their tanks, and the more cardiovascular fit you are, the longer that tank will last. So that is the reason why when students are on course here, they're required to run from point A to point B in order to keep their cardiovascular system as in shape as possible.
Hello, I'm Petty Officer Wood. I'm from the 9th BC. And what you're seeing here is called the awkward drill. So our divers will come, they stop what they're doing, and they run, get changed in their wetsuit, and they'll line up on the swim grid. This drill is to simulate responding to an emergency situation. So ship's divers act as rescue swimmers on board HMC ships. So when there's a man overboard, the ship will come to rescue stations, and the ship's divers that respond as a rescue swimmer.
Awesome. And so they were told that there's going to be a situation where they need to get ready to go dive, and so now this is replicating an emergency situation on a ship.
Yes, where this drill is initiated with the command awkward.
Mm-hmm.
So they hear awkward, they stop what they're doing, they run, don their wetsuits, ready for the water, and you'll see the whole course line up on the swim grid. And once they're all there ready, they report ready for the water.
And how long does this course last?
This course is 6 weeks long.
Okay. And what is, it seems like it's a very arduous course, like, I mean, very physically intensive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very physically intensive course.
And so obviously both men and women participating. And what is the success rate of a course like this?
Generally, we have about a 60% success rate. You see on average throughout the year.
And is that, I suspect that's mostly because of the physical,
Yes.
I guess, requirements.
Yeah, it's very not only physically demanding, just with the nature of the training itself,
Yep.
but diving itself is very hard on the bodies itself, very
Right.
physically demanding.
Right.
So,
Awesome. Thanks. So now, as we pivot over, what are we going to see here?
so you're going to see the course responding. They're all getting dressed, ready in their wetsuits. So you see teamwork, checking themselves over, making sure every diver is ready for the water.
Then are they going to jump?
So your best vantage point will actually be
From the
float
dock.
down below.
Ship Steve Concourse ready for the water, stand by! Enter the water! What do we want to be? Ship Steve Divers! What do we want to be? Ship Steve Divers!
And so you obviously found a home in or I guess a passion within diving. So once you've kind of gone through that Mars 3 phase, and how did you actually track now into the Fleet Dive Unit stream? Because here you are now as executive officer, so you've achieved some wonderful success in your career to progress through the ranks in this unit. So I'd love for you to tell me how you got here, but then also tell me what the Fleet Dive Unit does.
Sure, Jody. So the way to get here is this is called a director level sub-occupation.
Okay.
So you do your 2 years of afloat training on ships. So you're graduating towards a bridge watchkeeping certificate in charge of a major warship. So that is the ability to stand on the bridge of a ship and give directions as to where the ship goes.
Okay.
Then you pass your Naval Qualification Board, and that's the baseline of standard for naval warfare officers that says you have a base level of qualification, we consider you adequately trained. From there, you specialize into a director. That could be above water weapons, it could be underwater weapons, it could be deck operations, it could be information warfare.
Okay.
And then there's also clearance diving. So clearance diving is a sub-speciality of naval warfare officer. We come off of the ships,
Mhm.
and we train separately at Fleet Diving Unit Pacific.
Mhm.
And the purpose of a clearance diver is to neutralize underwater explosive threats,
So
which is a very fancy word for saying we dive and look for bombs.
neat.
Fleet Diving Unit Pacific is not just an operational diving base, it's also the home of a CAP diving establishment for training. So not only do we train our clearance diver students in-house, we also train search and rescue technicians, diving medical assistants, rescue swimmers, and ship's divers. So But what you're about to see is our clearance diving staff teaching diving medical assistants from across the CAF as well as from overseas on surface applied breathing apparatus diving configuration. Please follow me.
Just stand by on the emergency. Let's snoop, leak check. Is he good? Good, good. I need you to breathe.
And now emergency, open it all the way. Go, go, go.
Excellent. All right. Leak check. Good. Still good. You can breathe. Perfect. Red diver, 2 deep breaths, short count. Okay, red. Yellow diver, 2 deep breaths, short count. Red and yellow diver, stand by to go off emergency. Good. Red and yellow diver, off emergency. On the panel, air on to red and yellow diver. Red diver, 2 deep breaths, short count.
Yellow diver off emergency.
Okay, red. Yellow diver, 2 deep breaths, short count.
Okay, yellow.
Red and yellow diver, up and over to the side. Fenders take charge.
Big stand up.
Forward. Up.
We're walking that way, guys.
Right.
Big steps, big
Side
steps.
step to your right. Step up
Keep
there.
coming.
Step.
Follow me this way.
Forward.
And face out to the ocean.
A little farther.
Good. And if you look down right now, can you see the railing?
A little farther.
Okay. And you can always do that a bit to make it so you can see a bit better. So red diver is going to go first. Just wait here right now.
Red, you ready? Yellow, ready? Okay. Red diver, one hand on your helmet, other on your umbilical. With one big step, step forward, turning to your left. Step off.
Okay, so you're going to have this foot up on the railing,
Bring them over to the
or this foot up on the railing. Yep.
yellow diver. One hand on your helmet, other on your umbilical. With one big step forward, turning to your left. Step off.
Hello, my name is S1 Kosh Underhill. I work for the Royal Canadian Navy as a clearance diver, and we do multiple different things. Half of our job involves explosive ordnance disposal, and the other half is diving on all sorts of different equipment.
Awesome. Katrina, thank you so much for being a part of this episode. What was your motivation for joining the military, and specifically to go towards like the fleet dive unit occupation?
Of course. So I've always had an interest in the ocean. I joined the military when I was attending university. So I joined as a reservist, and it was an excellent part-time job to learn how to dive and get paid to dive. So I thought that was a bonus all around. So I started in the military with that job as a port inspection diver.
Okay.
And then I transitioned from university. I didn't really want to sit at a desk in front of a computer anymore, and I decided to try out for clearance diver, and I went for the selection and thankfully was picked up, and now I'm able to say I'm a qualified clearance diver.
Good for you. Good for you. And so tell me, what was some of the most challenging parts of your training? Because we just saw some divers go into the water, and you know, it's obviously very, very professional because it's serious business. You know, you're underwater. That's no fill, right?
Yeah, so I guess a challenge, maybe it's hard because there's always so many challenges with a job like this, but I guess I wanted to make sure that I was physically fit enough to be competitive with my male coworkers and to show them that I'm right there with them. I'm strong enough, I can do it too. So it was making sure the physical fitness for a female for sure, and then really dealing with just the elements is another big one, to do with the cold, long dives. You can be in the water for 3 or 4 hours depending on if it's a working job or if it's using sonar to locate something in the water. So yeah, it's a combo of all those things, and it can be a lot mentally and physically.
No kidding. You mentioned that it is physically demanding, and that there's not that many women in this particular trade. First of all, that's awesome that you're doing it. I think that's super cool. But what would you say to other women that are looking at this particular trade and interested? What advice would you give them?
I would say you definitely you're comfortable with being uncomfortable. You're okay with being cold. You're okay with being wet. You're able to keep a good head on your shoulders when you need to move fast in like an emergency situation or whatever the situation may be, because I feel like that's asked from us a lot of the times. So yeah, and then just touching on that physical fitness, you want to make sure you can perform just for your own health and safety while diving. So
I think it's great advice. And you now, I assume, in your position, you've probably traveled all over the world in what you do. That's got to be an awesome bonus.
Yeah, the travel with this trade is definitely a bonus. And a lot of the time you don't have to sail there. We get flown there. So depending on if you're a sailor or a diver, maybe at heart, maybe that makes a difference for somebody.
Right.
But yeah, the travel, I'm pretty new to the trade, but I was fortunate enough. I just got back from New Zealand about 2 months ago. So I went there on an exchange program called Op Regulus, and that was to just go work with the New Zealand clearance divers as their dive team. And yeah, it was an awesome experience.
What was the biggest difference that you saw from what your experience was in New Zealand versus how it is here?
They have much better dive equipment. My understanding is that the way their budget is, they're able to put a bit more money towards their equipment. Mm-hmm. So they had newer equipment. It was just some of it was easier to kind of set up, if that makes sense, due to that.
Sure.
But yeah, just newer kind of up-to-date equipment. So that was really fun to be able to dive that and get qualified on all their stuff.
Nice. And they're obviously a Five Eyes nation, so it's kind of cool that there's that partnership. But what was it like diving there compared to here? How would you compare the difference?
Warm water. The water, like, you didn't even have to wear a wetsuit. Sometimes if it was a shallower dive,
yeah.
That is a big difference. In Canada, it's always cold here, which makes it way different when you're wearing 2 layers of 7 millimeters of neoprene versus maybe one thin 2 millimeter of neoprene. It's just much different. Like, your dexterity, your comfort, all that sort of thing. It makes a huge difference in the warm water. Everything's easier doing working jobs. You can not have gloves on. You can use your hands. Just things like that.
Wow. Well, Katrina, thank you so much for sharing some of your experiences and your insight with me. I wish you much success.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
How do you resolve in your mind, Kevin, that risk and doing the job? Because you are going into harm's way. One of the pictures behind you shows a bomb disposal truck, and there's some examples of some ordnance there. I don't know if you want to pick one up and show somebody. But
so this is commonly called a Mills grenade or a Mills bomb. It's a British World War I style of grenade. They're very common
Okay.
Throughout the Commonwealth.
Okay.
And so a large number of people after the war, they may have taken some of their tools and equipment home with them.
Right.
Often these are rendered what's called inert, so they take all of the high explosive out, so it's a shell, which you wouldn't necessarily know from looking on the outside. So a very common call out in British Columbia is when older veterans pass away, and they've kept this in their shed for 75 years. So their family will go into their shed and they'll see this sitting on the shelf covered in dust.
Right.
And from that stage, you're not really sure what state it's in, what it is.
Sure.
So that's a very typical call that our unit would get called out to examine.
Okay.
So not only do we do underwater ordnance, we also do land-based ordnance as well.
Interesting.
So this is something that our teams would go, they would investigate, they would make a determination of whether or not it was in fact a live piece of ordnance, and then they would dispose of it at an appropriate location, safe area, as far away from the public as we can.
Right on, right on. And so yeah, that obviously speaks to this inherent risk in this occupation. So how do you personally approach this job, knowing that you could be called to go to a risky situation?
We're set up for success through our training system. So we have very good experience in training in Canada. We do our training not only in Canada though, at CFB Gagetown, Canadian Forces Base Gagetown. We also do an 8-month explosives base at Esquimalt Air Force Base in the United States.
Oh, nice.
So, and the United States has a great deal of experience, as well as Canada,
sure,
for dealing with explosive ordnance.
Yeah.
So, all in all, we do about a year's worth of intensive training to understand the type of ordnance, the type of unexploded ordnance that we come across. And when you have that level of training, and we practice it routinely to make sure that we're validated and we have some assurance that we can, do the job when called upon. I think when you're confident in your abilities, the risk remains there, but the risk is mitigated because it's much lower. Because you're confident in yourself and your team to do the job safely and correctly. So welcome back. We're in the sea mine familiarization area. So at Fleet Diving Unit Pacific, our core role as clearance divers, we are mine clearance divers. That's why the trade was initially stood up, was to have a force of professionals who could counteract the threat of sea mines. So for those who are unaware, so sea mine is any explosive device you place in the water with the intent to block or obstruct a waterway. It can be used defensively or offensively, but what you need to know about sea mines is that they're cheap, they're easy to produce, and they're easy to put in the water. One of the reasons why we still retain a capability here in Canada is because even the threat of sea mines is enough to force a nation or a military to devote resources to clearing an area. So if we wanted to transit a specific area and another nation even said they had put sea mines in the area, we would have to devote resources to ensuring that it was safe for our ships or merchant shipping to pass through that area. So a cheap, very effective way of achieving your objective and to obstruct the movements of a different nation that you may not be on good terms with.
Right.
So over here, this is what people think about when they think of sea mine. Round, circular, they come in various varieties. This is not an example of the specific type, but in general, people think of a sphere with some prongs on it. So what those prongs are is they're effectively switches. Different levels of actuation, different means of working, but you hit a switch, the mine will explode. Typically, these are laid just below the surface of the water in an area, so ships won't be able to see them. But they sit low enough that the hull of the ship and the movement of the ship through the water ought to trigger one of these. They usually come on carriages, but that's to the side. So these are what the generic contact mine may look like. As time wore on, other methods, more advanced methods of creating mines were developed. So this is an example of an influence mine. So another means of having a mine explode is it will detect, it has electronics on board to detect the magnetic signature of a ship or specific ships. They may also be fitted with acoustic sensors which pick up specific sounds of specific propellers or specific sounds of like the displacement of a ship through the water. So this is a more complicated, but equally threatening variety of mine. But the bottom line I would tell anyone who was interested in sea mines is that it doesn't matter which type of mine you put in the water. You just have to say you put mines in the water, and the same resources have to be expended to make an area safe. And that is why sea mines remain a threat, not only in Canada, but across the world.
And so, Lieutenant, when you you know, if you fear that there might be mines in the ocean wherever a Canadian warship might be going, you obviously have divers that are able to go down and investigate. But like you said, you use remotely operated vehicles, right? That's kind of the safest way to kind of approach and I guess neutralize something.
Yes, it is. So Canada is working on a remote mine disposal weapon system. It's currently in the procurement process. Other nations, such as the United Kingdom, the Royal Navy, they have a capability. Their type of remote mine disposal kit is called the CFOX. So what a CFOX is it's a tethered remote control. We'll call it a torpedo for lack of a word. It comes in two variants. The first is an inspection variant. So it will go down with a camera and give the ship or whoever is looking, better information as to what they're looking at. And if it is determined that is an explosive threat that needs to be neutralized, you bring back the inspection model and you can deploy what is called the war-shot variant, which has a 1.3 kilogram shaped charge on the front. And it's a one-shot, one-use bit of equipment, but instead of putting a person in the water to accomplish the same thing, you use an electronic means, a remote means to destroy that threat. Divers remain in use though in navies throughout the world because currently even the disposable CFOX variants are quite expensive.
Mm-hmm.
We can't put a price on the life of a person, but commanders have the discretion to understand what risk there is and to see if it is appropriate to use a diver or use, a remote means. Divers just remain part of the MCM spectrum of equipment.
Right.
So we're one option to be used. There
Right.
are many options, some of which are more advanced, but they're equally just as expensive.
Right.
So it's very helpful to have just that spectrum of tools to use to accomplish your mission.
Interesting. And so some of the other things that we're seeing here in this, I guess, repository of sea mines, you mentioned the round ones, the typical ones that most people would be familiar with from movies. But as you mentioned, this is a more the one that we're looking at in the frame is now one of the more a more modern type of sea mine.
So I haven't actually spoken about these specific variants. These are actually just dummies anyway. This type of technology has existed since the Second World War. The Germans, I believe, are actually the first nation to come up with a magnetically actuated type of airdropped mine.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, both types remain in use throughout the world, and both are equally threatening depending on how they are employed.
Right.